Welcome to a podcast on marketing. I'm your host, Jordan Ogren, and this is a podcast where we talk about marketing. The first question: who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. I'm Brooklin Nash. I do content marketing for B2B SaaS companies. Um, as Right now, I'm in between transforming from freelancer consultant to agency owner. So we're building up a small team under what my wife and I are working on together.
That's cool. What's the reason for the switch? Is it just time of the life? Is it some reason that you saw that you want to switch from kind of freelance to this agency model?
Kind of two things. One, it became pretty clear that we had two paths in front of us, either saying no a lot more than I wanted to potential clients and working with some really cool companies, or building up a team that we can work with to actually execute on a lot of this stuff. And it just sounded a lot more exciting to build a team than to just continue doing all the work on my own. I've benefited from working under as part of a great team, and I'm hoping to build something similar with what we have going.
That's awesome. That's really cool. It's interesting to see sometimes where people kind of maybe they came from that agency and they want to be a team of one, or you kind of were a team of one or two and now you want to take it to the agency. I always find that interesting, the reason or the impetus why some people do that. So, what is something,
Yeah.
Brooklyn, whether it's in content marketing, marketing in general, or even life in general, what is something or a few things you're obsessed with lately? Like you just can't stop looking them up. You're just geeking out about this topic, this theme, something you're seeing in the world.
Oh, that's a really good question. Something that I've been thinking more and more about is the importance of leveraging data and expert voices in content. I've been freelancing for about 8 years, in B2B SaaS for about five. And early on, a lot of my focus was SEO. I know there's obviously still very much a role for SEO. It's still very important for a lot of companies, especially if you're self-service. But I think it's a pretty limited view of what content marketing can be. So what I've been exploring more and more this past year is how to take your expert voices, whether that's your internal SMEs, subject matter experts, or your partners or your customers, and actually develop content based off of those conversations instead of it starting and ending with the marketing team. Um, and it's a lot easier said than done. It takes a lot more time and effort. It's a higher price point than something like an SEO article, but I think for a lot of companies it makes a lot of sense. So I've just been
Hmm.
kind of diving into what that looks like on the client side for marketing teams, and then also how to best package that up and bring value to teams that would be looking to do that. Yeah.
What was or what were some of like the reasons of obviously you kind of illustrated your change or your kind of progression from, writing much more of these SEO, these column listicle, those types of kind of where they obviously rank really well now to thinking, hey, let's get some experts, let's get the customer, let's get somebody else in to kind of have conversational content per se. What was the change?
Mhm.
Like what made you start looking deeper into this or thinking this is a better path, quote unquote?
Yeah, quite a few things came together. Maybe the biggest was my role at Sales Hacker as the community content arm of outreach, and maybe half my job was just being on calls like this with typically other salespeople, sometimes founders, sometimes web ops people, and just really enjoying that process because I learned a ton and a lot more than I could have by just putzing around on Google on my own, or reading a Gartner report or guide or whatever. So I think there's a lot of value in just learning from others who have been in a particular field for a long time. I just loved that part of the role and wanted to continue doing that. The other is I've had the opportunity to work on a few pieces for a few clients over the last couple of years that are very data heavy, where it starts with their own proprietary data and they're using that for kind of a deep dive into a particular area, whether that's advertising trends or how CDNs, like how much companies are spending on CDNs, or sales benchmarks. It's just a lot you can do with data, and it it's more valuable, it's more interesting, and it's more long lasting because you can then use that to support a ton of other types of content down the line. So those are a
Hmm.
couple. And then the third, honestly, was probably my internal role at Outreach too. I just loved talking to teams outside of marketing and then even outside of go to market. I mean, anytime I got on a call with an engineer or somebody in ops or HR, we just had really interesting conversations. So that just gave me a glimpse of what those folks have to share that sometimes doesn't often get there because marketing is typically so focused on a persona that may or may not match who's already working internally in our company.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I like that a lot. Just touching on like the last point, I think it's so critical that marketing gets outside of its own world in that sense. So you kind of
Mhm.
talk to sales, talk to product, talk to all these different kind of departments, and even obviously outside the four walls of your own company. As you kind of started with the
Mhm.
first point of really talking to sales hackers, it might not have been like users, but talking to people who are using your product or community members and just talking with them, seeing what they're thinking. I think is really key for marketing. And then your second point in between there, sandwiched, is the data. And I think that's so interesting, underutilized in the sense of I see only a few companies, at least obviously I'm one person, but like I only see like Gong and a few of these other companies really using their products information because that's a sweet thing with software, right? Is you have so much data because people are using it and you can kind of, you might have to think creatively. Sometimes it's not as easy as Gong, but then you can draw out kind of that data and use that to inform the customer and kind of have it be more objective based in the sense of like these are numbers. It's not just our opinion of like we think you should do this more or whatever. And I see a lot of like
Mhm.
state of the year reports on content marketing by animals or all these different ones. And like your point, then you can build on that year to year or quarter to quarter and look back and say, hey, where have we moved? And I think that's so informational for customers or for audience members to read and engage with.
Yep, that's exactly it.
Nice. So, if you had to describe or define marketing, like what is the job that marketing should get done in an organization?
Yeah, that's a loaded question these days compared to maybe 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even. I was just thinking about this when you asked the like define marketing question. I saw a great visual. Somebody tagged me in it on LinkedIn, and I can't think of who it was. I wish I could just give the call out right now, but I'll try to dig it up after. Um, and it was just about how far reaching marketing can and probably should be. So I think traditionally marketing, at least core marketing, has been about demand gen, audience creation, and then passing leads as MQLs to sales, and then sales takes over the conversation from there. And that's where those sales and marketing silo versus sales and marketing alignment has come in, right? But now, especially with I mean, like Gartner has this out of the increasing complexity of the buying process and how little time buyers actually want to talk to salespeople. They want to do a lot more research on their own. They want to talk to their peers. They want to talk to other customers and users and get kind of their brain around the full solution rather than having a few conversations with sales and then immediately jumping into a proof of concept or signing up for a pilot project or whatever it is. Um, so I think with all of that in place, with kind of the buying process becoming more complex and buyer driven, I think marketing has a much bigger role to play than just generating MQLs for sales. So now marketing, whether it's through content or field marketing, customer marketing, they can support the entire go-to-market organization throughout the buying process, from top of funnel and demand gen, all the way through to customer marketing and renewals and upselling and cross-selling. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that, but I think a well-formed marketing team will be able to add value at each of those stages rather than being this kind of separate generating entity, right?
Sure, sure. Yeah, it's almost transition. I don't know if you're aware of like soccer, but there's like the I don't want to forward, and then there's like a middle field person who goes like to offense and defense. It's almost seemed that
Mm,
marketing has now went to the full field in that sense. And I think I saw a similar one. It was like more of like a pyramid-esque, and it showed marketing stopping at a certain point. It's like the old way, and then it showed marketing going like further down of impacting stuff. So it could
mhm.
have been a different visual, but that was also a visual I recently have seen on LinkedIn, just showing like marketing now touches more stuff. Is it because of the complexity in the sales process? That's one thing you noted. Like, what else is driving this quote unquote change in how marketing, kind of how you would approach marketing or its role in the organization?
Yeah, I think it's the complexity. Well, I think people point to the complexity. I think that's Gartner's whole thing is that it's becoming more complex, but it's not just becoming more complex. It's becoming more um, self-served and self-driven from the buyer's perspective. Like it needs to be buyer-driven instead of sales-led. I guess would be, maybe those aren't antonyms, but like just giving the buyer, prospective buyer, what they need, no matter what that is. I think it's
Hmm.
like nobody wants to be immediately pointed to a demo, for example, or a discovery call if they're not ready for that. So there should be an option for them to be like, I don't want to get on a call with sales just yet, but I'm more than happy to receive any resources you have for me or to point me to an industry report that will help me get my brain around this complex piece of tech that we're just now starting to consider bringing into our organization, right?
Hmm.
Um, so I think it's about putting the resources in front of the buyer that will help them make the best decision that they're not going to regret a quarter or 3 quarters from now. And I think marketing is the function to make that happen because they can connect the dots between customer success, product, sales, and every other piece of the go-to-market work. And kind of,
Hmm.
like you said, though, that midfielder that can sit in the middle. I'm not a sports
Yeah.
guy, so hopefully that
Me neither.
matches.
I could have botched that entire analogy, but no, that's a really good kind of way of thinking. Almost to what you're saying, it makes me think of, the customer is in charge now. The customer has more control in that sense. So, like you're saying, if I don't want to get demoed or I don't want, like, I control it, where maybe in the past you couldn't find pricing unless you went on a full demo. It's almost for me as I talk with some of the, like you, other marketing kind of, thinkers. It appears that like B2C, you've mentioned, B2B is your background. It seems like because we do so much B2C, we're now in this mode that when we go to B2B buying, we don't really like do the switch of like, oh, I'm now buying a software, I'm buying B2B, I'm gonna do it differently. I'll fill out this form before I can see any of the product, whatever that is. Where B2C, I go on Amazon, I don't have anybody reaching out to me, as I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking through books or whatever. Like nobody's saying, hey, our book helps you solve this and that. It's like I can kind of do it on my own. Okay, I want to learn more about the book. I go to their homepage, webpage. Like it's kind of just like I'm in control of my journey. Where the past, it could have been more of in B2B, they want to force you down our journey or what we think the best process. You talk with
Mm-hmm.
someone, then you do this and that. So it's kind
Mm-hmm.
of allowing the customer to do what they want and understanding that they're now in charge, which I've heard from Drift and many other companies kind of paving this new marketing lens.
Yeah, and you can do that in. I mean, yeah, you can do that in your sequences. You can do that in customer success conversations. You can even implement it in your chat tool. I mean, they're so advanced these days. We just wrote a piece with one of our clients. They're a demand gen agency, and it was all on kind of your maturity in using a chat tool. And there's like the very basic, we're using it reactively for support requests or demo requests. And it's like either or. It's a current customer looking for help, or it's a sales channel to immediately point them to a call, all the way through to a much more expert level of using it where you're using the AI in a way that if they're ready for a demo, great, you can point them to sales and get them on a call. If they're not and they're just looking into the category or even a little bit further down the funnel, looking into the tool, your specific product, you can point them to some documentation and follow up, like use it, and then maybe eventually connect to a person. Like you can build you can build it in a way that is customized to their experience.
Hmm.
all the way to even in your chat tool, like when there's so many other tools that go to market teams use, that perspective shift I think would be very helpful.
Yeah, it can't just be like something you say in a meeting. It has to be through the tools you use and in all your marketing materials. Totally align
Mm-hmm.
with that. So you might think this, you might answer this question more in the content realm, but I'm just going to ask it in general. How do you define
Mm-hmm.
good marketing and bad marketing? If you had to create the dichotomy, and you can obviously rebuttal and say it's all in the perception of the perceiver, but if you had to put a flag in the ground of why do I think some marketing's good and some marketing's bad, what is your rationale for that?
Yeah, it'll definitely be colored from the content lens because there's well, now I'm prefacing it before I actually answer, but let me preface by saying there's a time and a place for immediate action, direct response type CTAs where it does make sense to have a book a demo type of approach. But I think in general, good marketing will immediately good marketing will allow the audience or the prospect or the buyer to immediately identify themselves in what you're talking about. Whether you're talking about pain points that your product solves, whether it's the processes that they run through that maybe have been manual in the past that then they can optimize or automate even with your product, they'll be able to recognize themselves in your content, and that runs from a deep dive how to your case studies and customer stories where it's your opportunity to allow themselves to identify themselves in what you're talking about, right?
Hmm.
Not so great marketing will pretty much always point back to the product instead of the pain point and the process and the needs of the buyer, right?
Hmm.
I mean, you talk about it in copywriting, it's all about highlighting benefits, not features, right? But that morphs over to content, and content covers pretty much any type of marketing you're putting out. It's not here's how our product solves for X. It's here's how this customer is taking X to the next level, or here's how we've done it on our team, or here's some guidance to get you going on how to optimize your process. There's like a million different ways to go about it, but it's about setting the buyer up for success versus pointing them to your tool, right?
Hmm. Yeah, for me, when you were talking, it pretty much comes to a dichotomy of customer focused or product focused or company focused, and
Mm-hmm.
really, when you're customer focused, you're not going to write or create marketing that's just highly kind of all about your product without kind of tying it to them through, as you're saying, case studies, benefits, all these things, and at some points, features depending on if it's a super technical product, but like regardless, I'm kind of creating that dichotomy that bad marketing is kind of very product focused. I don't know if it was Ann Hanley, but I read somewhere that when you're doing your marketing, it should almost be that the person getting your marketing is like, man, do they have my journal? Like they just know my intimate thoughts, kind of my what keeps me up at night, as cliche as that is, but like they really understand me, as you said, they get me, and I think that's what really good marketing. So for me, like some company that's selling like nail polish or like women's span, like I might just for me seem like bad marketing because it's like that's not like for me, but the person they're writing to is like, oh my gosh, like they know exactly what I feel and all these things. And I think that is why it's very contextual, but I think you can really break it down to within the context, it needs to be around that customer, that person, and really know them intimately well, as weird as that sounds, using the word intimate with like a
Yeah,
random person.
yeah. I like that journal analogy because that's about it. Which also, I mean, good. That means good marketing has to be focused, which typically also means it should be persona driven. Which means if
Mm,
it's persona driven, you have to be actually talking to your customers and what their pains are, so you can actually create informed personas instead of pulling them out of a hat, right? And you're
that's
choosing the top people you want to be speaking to. I mean, you might have a whole range of stakeholders that you're talking to, but it's difficult to create content for all those personas, let alone have a focused marketing effort by plugging that content into your demand gen efforts and your paid and your field marketing and what have you, if you're not prioritizing who those personas are. And it could be
Mm. That
a whole range. Like you could have the decision maker as like your CIO, and you could have the business user who's your product analyst or business analyst on both ends of the org. But just figuring out where the focus should be across that
mm.
spectrum.
Yeah, no, I would say a lot of bad content is trying to hit all of those personas, or it just, it just wraps everybody that could use the product into the whole post. So it's like, I don't know if, as like you just said, the product user or as the person who's going to purchase it, like it should be written uniquely to them, which then brings up a question in my mind. I've seen a lot of content, not against personas, but just the fact of creating these kind of created, kind of culminations of people isn't helpful. And it's good to actually visualize one person, like a real person when you're writing content, you're thinking about marketing. What do you think about that? Do you push back against that clause, or do you kind of agree that when you're creating content, you should have as close as you can get to a real person you're writing that content or creating that marketing for? Or do you stand by personas being kind of a group of images of people? Tim, he's 35 in the sales department. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it's still a helpful tool. With my business size, we can picture a real person. Like we just went through this last week where we went through our current customers and talked about who our ICP would be based off of who our ideal current customers are. And I had a handful of real people in my mind and talked to my team about that. But we're a tiny little shop. But if you're scaling a $100 million plus ARR SaaS product, that it becomes a lot more difficult to document that. So I think personas are still a very it's still a very useful tool, as long as they're not. I think sometimes personas can be just almost purely made up if you don't put in the due diligence ahead of time, where you're like, oh, we're selling to the CFO, so they're typically they're going to be 50 years old. This is what they care about. Here's what their life looks like. And honestly, pull in things that feel irrelevant, like the personal value side or what their life looks like outside of work. And sometimes those things are irrelevant compared to getting very hyper specific about what their pain points are, what they're looking for, what's important for them. So it's not that buyer personas aren't helpful. It's that a good portion of buyer personas can be unhelpful if you're not basing it in real research.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's important to touch on because if you use like a hammer to try to like fill a hole or something, like it's going to probably just cause more damage. So it's not the tool it's how you use that tool. So I think personas can be very useful if you get concrete, if you get definitive. But I think where I've seen them fail is very fluffy. They're just some, picture of someone. It's Sally, 35, and it's like, well, it doesn't really help. To your point, I need to know what is their life like. What are some psychographics? Okay, demographics are great. We love those, but like what do they believe, what do they think, what do they dislike, and all these things. And I think that's where personas have value. I was listening to a podcast with Ann Hanley. I bring her up way too much, but she talked about how she wrote her book Everybody Writes for Her Neighbor. Like she saw the neighbor, she worked as like a BDR, just some like business rep, so she needed to like do a lot of writing, and whether in presentations and sales emails, whatever. So she wrote that whole book with that person in mind, obviously probably taking concepts that she's learned with other people. But and even at her level of 50, 40, however many thousand followers she has on her newsletter, she still says, every newsletter is written to one person, whether it was a
Mm-hmm.
question somebody asked or whatever. So I think to your point, for sure, it breaks down as you scale a company. You just have too many customers to write to one every time. But I do think there is, as long as you can, try to hold on to it. Or if you have to use personas, to your point, make them definitive, make them actually accurate, and like value adding, as like cliche as that sounds, like make them actually helpful in your marketing rather than just like all these HubSpot created ones from their template, which is
Yeah.
good start, but you got to take it a step further.
Yeah. And even if you have the personas documented, like that's an individual action that an individual content marketer or copywriter or demand gen marketer or product marketer can take. Is let's take a persona and let me try to think of something specific. because I think that's true.
Hmm.
I think it's true no matter what kind of writing. One of my favorite books is On Writing by Stephen King, which is pretty much all about fiction because he's mostly a fiction writer, right? But there's so many lessons in there that apply to pretty much any type of writing. And he said the exact same thing. He said, when you're writing, think of somebody specific in your life, whether that's your spouse or your brother or a parent or a child that you're writing for, and then continually ask yourself if they would like basically like what you're writing, and that's really kind of his guiding light. And I mean, it's worked out for
Yeah.
Stephen King, so why not be the remarketers?
Yeah, no, I've read too many books on writing, and that's a very consistent theme. As much as like I wanted to push back on the notion, I just kept seeing that silver lining of like writing to someone, visualizing them as picture clear as you can, so you really are writing to someone rather than like, hey, all, I wanted to
Yeah.
write you like nobody, like I hate when I see that in newsletters, but it's definitely like a first step. You gotta, do it, but then once you want to go further with writing, with content creating, I think that's kind of a good thing to do. What
Mm-hmm.
is, to jump to a negative topic, what is a failure or a mistake you made, whether in your career, doing what you're doing now, further back, that, you look back on now and you're obviously not like grateful or thankful it happened, but you're like, hey, it helped me. Like I'm better off today because of that failure or mistake. Does any come to mind for you?
Quite a few. Which one do I choose? Yeah, that's a great question. Um, Probably the biggest, and this is more relevant to kind of the business my wife and I are creating now. So I've been freelancing for over 8 years. A few years back, I I think I tried prematurely to grow what I was doing, by bringing on subcontractors and focusing on the strategy end, and then working with them as kind of their editor. And it just didn't work back then. And I think for a few reasons. I think my price point wasn't right, so I wasn't charging clients enough to be able to pay contractors enough, which meant I wasn't able to work with the, the best or better contractors. I was working with those who didn't have that much experience or weren't putting that much effort in, because I was probably because I wasn't paying them enough. Um, and tried to kind of jump right into it instead of laying the groundwork with here's what the client brief says, here's our writing guidelines, that inform that, taking time to kind of build them up to a place where they could execute at the same level as I was. Um, so it led to not great work for some of my clients. Honestly, we lost one of my clients, not as a direct result, but around the same time. Um, and I don't know. So we took a pause from that for a couple of years, and over the last couple of years, I've been focusing on, um, getting consistent with getting consistent and specific with what I do. Um, Sorry, let me back up. Getting consistent with what I do and getting specific about what I don't do. So even as early as soon as, who's that? Oh gosh. As recent as a few years ago, I was doing kind of a lot of different stuff like social media here, some copywriting strategy, long form stuff, emails. So over the last few years, I've gotten a lot more specific with saying no to all of that and focusing in on long form content for a variety of channels and in a lot of different verticals, but just this one type of deliverable, basically. And then alongside that, bringing some consistency with the questions I'm asking clients, making sure I have what I need to be successful, whether that's buyer personas, like we talked about, list of competitors, their expectations and guidelines, so that we start off on the right foot instead of having to backpedal. And now I'm able to take those conversations and the foundation we have and translate that to the team of contractors we're working with now. And getting to the point where I'm able to charge clients more and establish more long-term projects, because I've proven that value, which means I'm able to pay our contractors more and treat it more as an investment versus something reactive.
That's good. That's good. I mean, I obviously have not tried to run my own, even freelance. I've had like two, three clients in my life, so not too many. But I feel like that's a kind of a, at least from what I've witnessed, maybe like a kind of thing that happens in consulting is you're good at something and you do all the things around that something, and then you start to realize, hey, I need to, as you're saying, I need to say no to more things, not niche down, maybe niche down, but kind of start to figure out what is that I do really well at. And I think you have to have time to be able to actually have the luxury or the privilege to say I'm only doing X, where sometimes you're like, oh, I got to take whatever I can get to put food on my table, you know. So I think
Hmm.
that's a interesting for me as someone who thinks long term about maybe doing freelance or maybe doing, you know, kind of work with companies. It's really interesting for me to just hear that kind of your progression. So I appreciate you kind of sharing that with us, having the vulnerability to kind of open up about that. I like that. It's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, and it's I don't think it's unique to me because I think freelancers in general have this what's it what is it, feast or famine mode, where it just leads to saying yes to everything because you're like, what if I, you've been freelancing for 8 years successfully, but you still have this niggling thought at the back of your mind, like, what if I never get work again, so I have to say yes to everything. But then like,
Hmm.
if you're, I've said before, if you're a freelancer, you're a business owner, so this isn't just for those looking to scale, but if you're looking to increase your income as a freelancer, I think it's about taking more of a business owner mindset and getting specific about those things so that you can optimize where you're spending your time. It's like the services equivalent of product market fit, right?
Mm, yeah, definitely, definitely. What, as you have a lot of experience with content marketing, what are some skills that you've either had to hone yourself or maybe you naturally had that you see get flexed in creating content? What are some of those skills that someone could obviously try to optimize for to be a better content marketer, which then I'm going to obviously just parallel that to probably become a better marketer in general? Do any kind of pop into your mind?
Yeah, I think the one immediately comes to mind, but I haven't been able to come up with a name for it. So maybe you can help me with this. This has helped me as a freelancer. It helped me in my role as a community content manager when I was working with contributors, like we were talking about. It's helping me with expert interviews. Is being able to take in the big picture and basically like an information dump, whether it's a huge data set or an hour long conversation with a highly technical person who's just super passionate about what they work on and just kind of they can just talk a mile a minute for for an hour about their product or data or whatever it is they're talking about. So being able to take those pieces where there's just way too much information to actually put into one piece of content, whether it's an ebook or a thought leadership piece or a pillar page. So taking that very broad and deep set of information and knowing what the end result needs to be, and then figuring out what you need to do in the middle to map that out and sort through what is it, the important kernels to pull out, the thread to pull on, and then how it weaves all together. Um,
Hmm.
because I think, yeah, honestly, I think that's what has served me best. Because I can sit and have an hour long conversation with an engineer, and even though I've never been a front end engineer or back end engineer or worked on SQL, I can take what they're talking about and understand that, like, pull out, kind of like visualize an outline in my mind from what they're talking about and which pieces to revisit. Um, so I don't have
Hmm.
I don't know what that is. It's like the synthesis of information or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a first word that came into my mind was just being able to synthesize, you know, so you get this huge load of content and you're able to dump it to the bare essential pieces. But as you were explaining it, it kind of started to break the bounds of that word. And another word is almost like architect. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like they need to be able to do architecture of, okay, taking this and then what are these points of the building that we're going to build off of, and I may not build the building, but I'm able to take this, hey, I want it to look like this, I want it to X, Y, and Z, and then you synthesize that to be able to architect. So it's almost like architectural synthesis, or like some like crazy word, new category we'll create. But yeah, no, I totally think that's valuable. In what have you done, or what has allowed you to get better at that, or is it just an inherent skill that you've always had?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's one of my skills, and I don't have many, so I'm grateful for that. But something that helped me get better at it um, was what I said earlier, just spending a lot of my time working with contributors and community members in my previous role on highlighting what those things are for them. So one of my favorite pieces of the job, besides being on face-to-face calls, was we'd get drafts from contributors who are very experienced in sales and have a lot to say on it, but aren't necessarily writers by trade, right? So I'd look at the draft, I'd get it in my inbox, open it up, spend 10, 15 minutes. And instead of jumping right into editing mode where I'm like, oh, this is awkward phrasing, let's switch this around, I just took it in from a big picture. And then my first round of feedback to them was just a list of bullet points in an email back to them saying, like, okay, you mentioned this here. Can we go deeper there? Or this piece way down here feels like it's pretty off
Mm,
base with what the core of this article is supposed to be about. So I think we actually cut that and instead go deeper at this piece you mentioned up top. Or
mm,
this list of bullets you include, like, I think there's a lot of meat there. Can we expand those into subheaders for the article? Just like giving them big picture feedback on what like you said, the architecture of the piece of content should be. And that was just a
mm.
lot of fun. And I think it did make me better at it over time because then I could more and more quickly identify what was working and what wasn't about each piece of content.
Mm. Yeah, no, I like that a lot. Thanks for sharing. Something that comes to my mind when you're talking about that is just understanding the basics. So rather than jump right into editing grammar, you kind of understood, or maybe you didn't understand. But like for me, I think editing has a process. Like the first sweep, it needs to be very kind of like, about the flow, you could say, but it's really like you were kind of mentioning, you're looking at it to say this section, like we just need to remove it, or this needs to go up top. So you're being that kind of high level person, architecture, you're moving things around, so it's almost like understanding, having just a basic understanding of whatever you're doing, to be able to kind of come into it with that understanding of, hey, I'm going to do this, then the next step I'm going to kind of do sentence structure, is going to kind of fix any sentences, and then finally I'll do grammar.
Mm-hmm.
So it's having like a way of understanding, called practical thinking, but you can understand what needs to get done in the whole thing of the whole scheme of whatever you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then another thought popped into my head is, I read in a book, it titled it kind of this kind of thinking from the basics, as this kind of contrarian optimism, optimistic contrarian, as someone who, I never take assumptions or these kind of beliefs, but I go right to the basics, and I kind of build my thinking from the base rather than from this. And that takes, the time to step back and have that 10,000 foot view. So as you were talking, my head is kind of rambling of like, oh man, all these different things that I've read or thought of kind of coming into one skill that I think, content marketers, but marketers in general, really need to have. And one thing that's helped me is just reading tons of different books. Obviously, I'm a reader, so like I like reading books, but kind of opening up my palette and reading at one time like 3 to 4 different
Mm-hmm.
books, and almost letting their ideas like intermate together. And oh, I never would have had this idea if I wasn't reading this book on grieving, and also this book on copywriting and marketing or whatever. And then that allows you just to always kind of go to the basics or have a higher level view to then drive in deeper if you need to. And I think that was something that popped into my head as you were kind of talking there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think reading and input is super important for better output. And beyond just like if you're a marketer, beyond talking to other marketers or just reading marketing books, like if you're a marketer, read a sales book, read lots of fiction, talk to engineers
Yeah.
and your product team and data teams to kind of open up your horizons a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, damn it. I wish we could keep going forever. This is a great conversation, but I do have 3 questions I always end with, and I want to make sure we have sufficient time for those. I always enjoy these answers. So I'm going to ask you 3 final questions. two questions are heavily related to kind of everything we've been talking about, and one is going to be a little bit off base. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll start with the first two that are kind of on point. So, what is one thing you've changed your mind on in regards to marketing, content marketing over the past 3, 4, 5 years? So 5 years ago, I believed content should be produced at 100 pieces a day, and now I believe quality content is key. Like, what is that for you that you've changed your mind on or pivoted your thinking around?
Yeah, I think the biggest is the role of SEO. I would 4 or 5 years ago when I would come to a client, I was, I mean, I was always what is it, a hammer, where I always saw the need for a nail when maybe there wasn't. I think SEO makes a lot of sense in a lot of cases, but it doesn't always make sense as a primary channel for content. Um, if you're if you're coming into a crowded space and have a complex tool with a pretty high ACV or deal size, maybe you explore, maybe actually paid will be make more sense, and you can drive that via content, or investing in thought leadership. SEO doesn't always have to be the first thing you invest in. I think it makes a lot of sense for self-serve, lower price point tools to get up there quickly, and I still very much believe in its value. But there's a lot of other pieces, and I think lots of folks, I used to, and I think lots of folks still equate content with SEO or content marketing with search, and that's just not always the case.
Hmm. I'm just in my head, I'm yelling as you're saying that. Preach. I definitely agree with your thinking just on regardless of the effect of SEO, but I think a lot of us go from an absolute thinking. Not maybe yours was an absolute, but it's content is always the play.
Mm-hmm.
Like whatever that absolute is, and as over time you see different use cases, you start to kind of understand the basic thinking, and you're like, maybe it's not always the way, and you need to think differently to apply it. Like you were talking about the hammer and the nail, which takes critical thinking, which obviously is a skill hard to come by at times,
Mm-hmm.
just in general,
Mm-hmm.
is to really think about stuff rather than just doing it. Because there's millions of things I do every day that I don't think about. Why do I, do this before this? And when you really start to think about stuff, you'll
Yeah.
obviously make better. You'll live better. And relating that to
Yeah.
marketing is a wide stretch, but
And
it's just,
yeah, absolutely. And I know this isn't pointed directly at freelancers or agencies, but I think that's been a big shift too, is because it's led to me on discovery calls telling somebody, actually, I don't think we're a good fit for you because I think you should be doing X, Y, Z and not A, B, C. And I think that helps build trust over time, because then instead of them coming to me and saying, this is what we want, and me saying, okay, great, it's 10K a month and you can, I'll invoice you next month. It's actually, maybe you rethink that one because here's what I'm thinking on it, and I can refer you to some other folks where it maybe does make more sense to work with them. So I think that's definitely benefited my relationships in the last couple of years.
yeah, no, that's definitely a good tip for anybody that is, doing kind of a specific consulting or freelancing. And sometimes it may not be best, and that'll probably help you in the long term, in a sense, to say no, which ties back to what you were saying way earlier about saying no more
Mm-hmm.
to things. So that's cool seeing the intertwine. Next question: there's a movie, whether you watched it or not, I'll give the 2 to 3 listeners kind of some context. It's called Inception. It's all about they go into the brains of
Mm-hmm.
people in their dreams and they incept ideas. So they wake up and it's like, oh, I want to sell my company, and that was my idea.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could incept one idea in the mind of every marketer on this planet, so they wake up tomorrow and they believe this idea is theirs and they act it out in their actions, what is that idea you incept?
Oh, wow. I mean, I could go like the strategic route, but I think I might have to get a little wonky with this one, because it's something. So my wife and I, like that 30, like a little bit of context here. My wife and I come from the nonprofit space, and then now we're jumping into B2B tech. And there's just a lot of BS in B2B tech, and like this belief that we're just like building the latest greatest thing that's like changing the world. And I just like, I'm sorry, but it's like it's often not the case. And now I'm sitting in this role where I'm helping software companies sell software to other software companies, and I have this disconnect between what I value and what I believe and what I want to put effort into and what I enjoy doing and what I get paid a healthy amount to do. And this is the career. So I feel like it's such a big question. It's a good question. With such a big question, there has to be a bigger answer. And I would say, to incept an idea, it would be that we have a responsibility to figure out how to actually improve the world with what we're doing. And that doesn't always mean like launching a product that helps address homelessness in the US or provide donations to a different country. It doesn't have to be always as direct as that, but I think it does mean taking a step back and seeing where you can help others, whether that's in progressing in their career, mentorship, donating directly. Like if you're in tech, like you're almost automatically, in most cases, making a ridiculous amount of money for what we do. Like it's just totally unfair and ridiculous a lot of times. So like even if it's just figuring out
Yeah.
what you're passionate about and giving money there or your time there, like just take a step back and realize that we're very lucky to have a career in B2B tech marketing, um, and just start thinking about where we can give back.
That's deep. That's deep. It's so true. I feel many times, especially in the past, it's been profit driven, but I see a need and an acceptance of kind of what you're talking about is, how do we help the world be a better place? And yeah, there's, initiatives, zero kind of emissions, all these kind of easy or quick ones, but there's a lot of things you can do as a company to just be better to your employees, even
Mm-hmm.
like, do we work 55, 60 hours a week or do we have Fridays off? Or, yeah, no, I love that. That goes to the core of kind of a lot of the stuff for the companies I follow, the reasoning why I follow them is they're just trying to make a net value, like an add to the world, rather than most companies are like our product's the greatest. It's all about profit, and I think that's sometimes detrimental in the long run, especially. And like you said, obviously, if you come from a background with nonprofit or with mission driven, it's really hard then to like look at it and not. So sometimes I think it's a real big mental shift or just kind of what do you value in life. So
Yeah.
that'd be a great world. I would love living in that world with all marketers valuing the greater good than just kind of making our product
Right. Right.
be the number one or
Yeah.
whatever.
And it's something we're
Yeah, I
figuring
like
out
that. All
too.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no easy answer. All right. Final question is what is one thing outside of business and marketing that you do that helps you when you come back to business and marketing? So for me, it's meditating.
Mm.
Every morning it's about 20 minutes on the mat. So like what is that for you that helps you do business and marketing better, but isn't business and marketing?
Hmm. That's a good question too. Man, ended on the three probably hardest questions to answer. I honestly, I think the thing that comes to mind first is we talked about reading before. I read a lot of fiction. I rarely read business books or marketing books or copywriting books. I read a lot of fiction and then a lot of memoirs and biographies. And I think that honestly helps me mostly because at the core of what I do, I'm a writer, even if it's for demand gen or product marketing or what have you. It's about the writing. So just kind of through osmosis gives me new words, new perspectives. It also refreshes my brain, like you're talking about meditation, like it's actually just genuinely enjoyable. And if I'm into the book, I'm not thinking about work directly. So I think just taking that space to have that input not always be business oriented or marketing oriented has really helped.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the second time I heard that. Put down the damn business books and go get you, Harry Potter or some sort of other book that allows you to, just kind of what you're saying is disengage, unplug from business marketing for however amount of times. So when you come back, you've allowed thoughts and things to kind of work on their own rather than always, fixating on, I have to read this new book by Mark Benioff.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's an autobiography or something, memoir,
Yeah,
feel
yeah,
free.
yeah.
But no, that's good. That's good. I like that, Brooklyn. Okay, this last section, I kind of just open up for you to share anything that you want. I know you're on LinkedIn quite frequently. I love following you for your content. So if there's anything outside of that you'd like to link to the 3 to 4 listeners still here with us, feel free to take the stage.
Yeah, I'll just say LinkedIn if you're on LinkedIn or Twitter if you're primarily on Twitter. I'm on both, so feel free to connect, follow, send a DM, whatever. I'm around. I'm always up for these types of conversations with with other marketers and especially freelancers because I come from that world. So feel free to reach out.
Awesome. And those will be in the show notes. Thank you so much, Brooklyn, for coming on. This was a splendid time. I had so much fun.
Me too. Thanks, Jordan.
Yes, this is the end of the podcast.